And I wondered if we could then just sort of move on and explore this pathway a bit more, because one of the things, when I know, because I've obviously been involved in it, there's a real kind of restorative element to this pathway as well. And we haven't really explored that yet, but I think we really need to, because I think this issue of restorative practice is becoming a concept that's becoming more familiar, but only now, I think, and slowly in healthcare circles. And I wonder, Joe, because I know you're a restorative practitioner as well, I wonder if you could start us off talking a bit about this. And I wonder if you could say a bit about what a restorative approach means, and how does the harm patient pathway build upon those principles, and how would you feel that is a different approach to the one currently used in healthcare practices, particularly when there is avoidable harm that occurs?
So I suppose it builds on what we've been saying about this sense of moral duty of care. So when a safety incident occurs in someone's care, it may or may not cause any harm, as we know, but it might be investigated nonetheless as an important safety incident to learn from. But with what we're focusing on, we're focusing on when there has been harm. Harm has been caused to a patient and also their family. And we know that's happened, and we don't feel very good about it. So whilst we absolutely know and understand how things go wrong in healthcare, and we have really sophisticated understanding about that, we've learnt not to blame or scapegoat staff on the front line, of course, and understand all the contributory factors and all of those things. But nonetheless, when a patient has come to us and put their trust in us, their faith in us, their families have put their faith in us, and things have gone wrong and they've been let down, everybody feels it, don't they? They feel a sense of responsibility for the harm and a sense of devastation around having let someone down, because that's not what anyone wanted. We hear so frequently, don't we? Nobody goes to work to cause harm, and equally no patient or family member places themselves in that vulnerable position to be harmed. Yet here we find ourselves. And so if we focus on that, that really is the moral meaning of the events, isn't it? That harm has occurred that nobody wanted. And yet that situation now, in a restorative lens, we recognise that these events are harm to people, so people's well-being, whether that's obviously the patient, also their family, also staff involved and onlookers, because it hurts us all to see that a patient has come to harm. So you can have the physical harm, but also all of the emotional and psychological consequences. But ultimately, through a restorative lens, we recognise it as harm to people, harm to the trust and the confidence that was there that's now shaken for everyone, and harm to relationships. So there's a strained relationship now as a result of what's happened. There might be many strained relationships. And a restorative response is responding to the well-being, the trust, and the strained relations with the intent to try and put those right wherever you can. So that's really the way of thinking that we want people to be able to adopt when they're then going to pick up the pathway, that this is something that's happened that has harmed people, trust, and has caused strained relations. And if that is then our guide in terms of what we want to do to respond, those are our goals, then what are the approaches that we can use to get there? And I think we all know instinctively as human beings, really, how that looks in terms of acknowledging truthfully the harm that has been caused, and responsibility for that, and wanting to lean in. It's a reach for trying to put things right, that in our normal everyday lives, when we do that, it helps to restore the person that's been harmed, well, to the extent possible, but it restores self to do that willingly. It's dignifying acts, isn't it, for other and for ourselves in any situation where we've caused harm. That's what we instinctively are sort of driven to do. So the restorative approach really is about responding to the moral meaning, recognizing that it's harm to people, trust, and relationships, and seeking to put those right. And of course, in doing so, we need to inquire, what has this experience meant for you? What has it done to you? What are you now carrying as a result of what's happened? There's some acknowledgement then that, that's happened to you. We feel responsible and we wish to try and make things right. What can we do? What do you need? And it's really, if that is our sort of guiding principles in terms of who is affected, who is harmed, how are they harmed, and what do they need, and what are the moral obligations around those needs if we're recognizing responsibility and we want to repair, then we can use the pathway to work with that.
So thanks for that, Joe. I just wonder if I could follow up, if that's okay. Um, is there any kind of evidence base to support this work around the harm patient pathway and restorative practice?
So, yes, there is academic literature that I believe supports this approach. But I suppose if we focus on the broader question, is there an evidence base? For me, first and foremost, I think it's important to look at what harm patients and families have been telling the system themselves for decades, and look at what they were really saying rather than perhaps how it was interpreted and then plugged in. So I haven't, when I look at what harm patients and families have been saying around complete transparency, help us to understand what has happened, because we need that for our well-being ultimately. The behaviours of harm patients and families. So often patients and families will seek to find independent advice and advocacy. So AVMA is often overwhelmed with demand because that's what people are showing us. Is a need. It's the same with peer support. Like, we often find those of us who have had our own lived experiences and are on social media, that people will reach out to us because they find huge help in being able to speak to other people who have been through a similar experience. So you notice that peer support would be something that over time should be developed just through the behaviours that people are showing us. So I'm not sure we always need um, sort of academic inquiry when we can see through the behaviours of people and the things that they've said firsthand, what's required that hasn't really changed over decades. However, there is a body of literature that supports this. Um, Unsurprisingly so, academic approaches that have spent time listening and wanting to understand from patients and families what they need, and those have been published. There was a paper from Charles Vincent 30 years ago now, called Caring for Patients Injured by Their Treatment, that very much speaks to the approaches that we're now advocating in the pathway. And there's been works ever since then. I'm just reflecting on a couple, I won't name them all, but there was a lot of work from Murray Anderson Wallace and Suzanne Shale around 2013, 2015, again, looking at restoring trust. They were asking, what is quality in the aftermath of harm? And being really clear that we need, there was an obligation to address not just physical harm, but moral and psychological harm that goes with it adequately in responses. And they had some really clear messages around what was needed. And again, all of that speaks and talks to the work that we've implemented here. And much more recently, we see the work of people like Joanna Whaling from New Zealand, Jane O'Hara, Ali Koyman, lots of work talking to this idea of humanizing responses to harm. This word humanizing very prominent within the titles of those research papers, and they're all speaking to the need for restorative approaches in the aftermath in order to address those human needs. So the literature is there, and we'll certainly be including a literature list as part of the pathway. But we also must look at what patients and families have been saying very clearly for a very
Yeah.
long time, and how this speaks to that too. Yeah, absolutely.
Really helpful. Thank you, Joe. And it's just, I mean, it's so powerful that, that this literature goes back 30 years to Charles
Mhm.
Vincent. There's a long gestation of this. So
Mhm.
really interesting to sort of see that all come together with, as you say, the rich patient experience, which AVMA knows so much about and sees all the time. So thank you so much for that. So, Peter, thank you for your views there about sort of a just and restorative approach and a just and restorative culture in healthcare. What strikes me about that is the potential for that to feel a bit woolly, if I can describe it as that, as something that feels all very soft, and that actually, I'm a patient, I want to complain. I've got rights, haven't I? So are we saying that we want to sort of move away from all of that and I can't exercise any of those rights? Or how does any of that play out in this just and restorative culture that you talk so eloquently about?
Thanks, Paul. That's a really good question and something that's sometimes misunderstood. So, whilst we're passionate about taking a just and restorative approach, um, nothing in what we're saying would dilute people's rights, if need be, to take very uncomfortable actions such as legal action, complaints, or health professional regulation referrals, for example. We'd like to think that increasingly, if the harm patient pathway is adopted, based on what we've learned from people that we've spoken to, many of those things wouldn't be necessary if they'd had the appropriate response. But for some people, they are necessary, and they're quite rightly rights that need to be upheld. And indeed, we talk in the pathway about when those processes are being used, you never, despite that fact, forget that these are human beings to whom we owe a moral duty.
You've had many more years of experience of AVMA and the sorts of people it supports, thinking about a helpline and people coming to us and what they're asking for and then needing by way of practical support sometimes, because they're not all coming saying, I need a solicitor, I want to take legal action. That's far from what they're often asking for. And I wonder, Peter, you could offer a view about how this ties into sort of some of the practical support people are looking for and probably need. I don't know if you have a view on that.
Yeah, sure. So just so that people understand what the harm patient pathway actually looks like practically, it sets out a number of key commitments that organizations need to actually understand and sign up to about addressing the needs that we've been talking about for people when they've experienced healthcare harm. Now, none of them are rocket science. They'll be familiar with a lot of people. But what we go on and do with each of the core commitments is provide a number of essential elements about how that looks in practice, depending on the individual needs of people, because, of course, people's individual needs will always be unique and different. So not everything applies to everyone. But the two things together, the six core commitments and the essential elements for each one, provides a framework for organizations to think about how they are responding to harmed patients.